Today we're going to cover some exciting topics, and then we'll have some time for some activity. I realize following lunch is probably not the best slot, but hopefully you're still enjoying your sweets and getting some sugar, getting some energy levels up, and just stay with me here on the presentation. It's going to be coming up in just a minute.
I'm sorry. It's okay.
All right, so today we're going to briefly review from the GCAS annual report that we bring to you each year, and we're going to be discussing some topics related to audit efficiency and timeliness, particularly in light of the newly adopted GC policies related to transparency and accountability that you may or may not have heard of yet. And then we're going to have some time, as I mentioned, to have some activities to quiz you on some concepts that you already know or maybe should know. So you'll see this slide represents our global client base, and you can see that globally, two of our largest client types are conferences or missions and then educational institutions. And then we have a variety of other client types that round out the worldwide portfolio. Now, within North America, we had 334 clients as of December 31, 2011. And again, you'll notice that our two largest client types are conferences and educational institutions, with the educational institutions being the largest percentage there. Now, over the next few years, you may notice that some of the client types or the overall quantity of clients will change with the policies related to audits of departments, such as ABCs or FHES programs, and where those audits will be incorporated most likely into the overall parent organization, which is typically a conference. Now, there will be exceptions to this if approved by the union, and so you will want to be sure that you're communicating with the union if you are this type of entity, or if you have such an entity, to be sure you're aware what is the plan for your audit and the related costs for that. There is the option, if the union is not going to subsidize a separate audit, but you would still like one, you could pay for those services yourself. So you want to be sure to coordinate with Seth and his team on that, and coordinate with us as well. Now, we've also discussed, I believe, in the past that the North American division is working on providing a lower level of service for certain types of organizations. Some sort of a review plus some agreed upon procedures possibly. And this would be for probably very small organizations, which may be defined as organizations with something like less than $500,000 in revenue. Now, there's an exception to that being academies. The division is still going to have audits of academies regardless of size. This would be K-12 or just secondary schools, 9 through 12. Now, just to give you a little bit of information about the makeup of our GCAS team, for those of you who have been associated with us for a long time, you may remember that GCAS was once a very male-dominated organization. And as you can see from the slide, we're actually evening out nowadays, which is a great thing, I think. And you'll also notice that more than 80% of our team members have satisfactorily completed the CPA exams. So we're very proud of that. Now, within North America, again, as I mentioned, there's 334 client engagements. Now, this does include trust engagements as well as the financial audits and policy audits that we complete. And as of December 31, 2011, 289 audits had either been completed or were in process. Each year, we also like to report to you on the types of reports that we're issuing, financial opinions that we're issuing. And during December 2011, 74% of the financial opinions that we issued were unqualified. Now, of those unqualified opinions, they represented more than $5 billion in assets. And then you'll see, qualified was a little over $1.5 million in assets. Now, in North America, you have a list here of the most common reasons for qualification. And you'll see the number one reason, I'm sure it's not a surprise to you as you sit here, is related to assets being that are unowned being reported on financial statements of another entity. And the most common example of this is related to academy land and buildings, which are owned by a conference but generally reported on the academy financial statements. And this is a common practice, but it does result in a qualification. Now, in the Columbia Union, another qualification that we found to be very common relates to the inability to verify the completeness of donations. And this might raise some red flags for you, but what this is referring to is most typically donations of church and school properties or additions to those properties, and sometimes there may be an issue with the documentation that you've been able to obtain from your local entities. And if that can't be obtained in a timely manner or maybe isn't available at all, that may result in a qualification for your financial statement. Yes, sir?
Could you give us some suggestions of how to cure that? How to fix that?
Well, it may be best to network with one another, since I don't sit in your shoes, but what I've seen some organizations doing that seems to be helpful is organizations will send some sort of inquiry letter out, maybe near year end, maybe a couple times a year, to find out what type of projects have been going on, if any, or they may say, if you've had a project over X dollar amount, please let us know and give us some of the details, and maybe what percentage of the project has been completed. Are you able to send up some financial information? And then oftentimes what we're able to receive then is a listing of disbursements that have been made for that project for the given audit period. And then we're able to select a sample for testing it on the audit. Of course, we don't want to or need to look at every single transaction, so we would try to pick a sample. And the sooner you have that list from your congregations and can send it to us, we can pick our sample ahead of time so that you can have it ready and available, the invoices ready and available for the audit. So we find that organizations that do the inquiries seem to have good feedback and then are able to adequately update their general ledgers. All right, another item that was noted in the Columbia Union Territory that's also on this list for North America relates to the scope limitation due to the state of the accounting records. And just to break this down, what it means is there was something specific, some sort of specific area that we weren't able to fully audit and in accordance with auditing standards. And so the scope of the work was limited, which results in a qualification. So on that item, we weren't able to express an opinion. And that could be for a variety of things across each organization. Now let's talk about working policy, your favorite, I know. As you can see here, most of the policy reports issued across North America had some sort of policy citation for noncompliance. That would be at least one item. So it's very common, and we realize that there can be challenges with complying with the core policies. Now, these are the top 5 reasons, or most frequent reasons, for working policy violations. And those relate to missing conflict of interest statements, failure to comply with the policy on review of local churches and schools, possibly improperly updating or missing service records for your employees, non-compliance with the policy related to monthly financial statements, and then failure to budget for a loss recovery, and that applies when you have less than 100% of recommended working capital. Now, of course, with your audit, you receive an audit communication letter that's addressed to your Financial Audit Review Committee, and this shows you some of the most frequent reasons for internal control deficiencies that were noted in North America. And we're going to have some quiz questions on this a little bit later to test some of your knowledge on the concepts that would be cited in your audit communication letter. Now, of course, we realize that the audit can mean different things to different people depending on what your role is. You may have different expectations. So it's important for us to understand each other's role. And of course, the auditor's role is to be responsible for their reports. This is the opinion on the financial statement, the policy compliance report, the audit communication letter, etc. And also, it's important for you to remember that we have to conduct our work in compliance with auditing standards that are established by the profession, as well as denominational expectations and standards. Now, the treasurer, along with their staff, are responsible for, I realize among many other things, Working throughout the year to maintain the accounting records and record things appropriately. Implementing and maintaining internal controls. Also reporting to the board regarding operations, how you're doing compared to budget, how you're doing compared to the prior year, etc. And then coordinating with the auditors and the audit committee regarding audit scheduling and other things. Now, something that we may not often consider is the role of the audit review committee. Sometimes we think they just meet once a year and out of sight, out of mind, but they really should play a critical role in your organization. Now, part of that role should be to meet with the auditors, and typically this will take place prior to the audit, possibly during, depending on some of the things that may be taking place during your audit, and then afterwards they'll meet with the auditor to review the results of the engagement.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Is there any way to measure how effectively and efficiently our audit review committees are operating?
That's probably very subjective, but there may be some metrics that you could put into place. The effectiveness and the efficiency may be different depending on who's assessing it and what your expectation is of your audit committee. And so you want to be clear with your committee members that this is what you expect from them, and you also want to be clear what they expect from you. And certain organizations may utilize their audit committee in different ways, but it is important that they play a critical role and that they understand things like risk, and that could be business risk, or that could be fraud risk, and you want to have them involved in your fraud risk assessment process. I'm not aware of a specific metrics. There may be one available. I don't have that right now as a tool, but I think that developing those expectations is what would be critical to being able to then later assess how effective they are.
I attended a seminar put up by AICPA in Washington, D.C. Some of the procedures and processes they have in place would not really relate to our church entities, and I really hope somewhere down the road somebody could begin to pull together what an effective audit review committee on the church should look like, so that we could train those members to be more effective in what they do. They would know exactly what their role should be as it relates to relating the finance of our entities.
Sure, and I do know Robin has done some presentations on effective audit committees and things like that, and I could look back and see if there are some resources that we could share with this group as well from that. Now, one thing that you want to be sure of as well with your audit committee is that you keep them informed of your audit dates and also of how you're addressing risk currently. So they may be aware by reviewing the audit communication letter with your auditors that there are some risks that have been identified, some areas of weakness, but you also want to let them know proactively what you're doing to address any risks that you've already identified. You also want to consider the expectation of your users. As I already mentioned, developing clear expectations with your audit committee and what their expectations are of you. And we also have to consider expectations as we're reviewing your audit. You know that we work on levels of materiality, and we have to consider if something would be material to your users. Would it change their mind if something was presented differently or was not recorded versus recorded and that type of thing? So we all have different expectations. You have expectations of us, we have expectations of you, and we want to be sure that we have open dialogue to make sure that we understand one another. Yes, Steve?
Sounds like I did a professor's class, and I got to tell me the audit review committee was not established, had not met for a couple of years. So I put it together. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be telling them that I'm not on the committee. I mean, can we get some practicalness to this discussion? I'm sorry, that's very disrespectful.
I don't think that's disrespectful. And it's a reality. The North American Division decided to establish or require audit review committees. There were very little guidelines given. It told what the constitution of the committee should be, and that was about it. It did not go into the role, its major role. I serve on some other audit review committees, and we are engaged. We engage the auditors with pre-audit work before audit starts. There's pre-audit work and then post-audit work. We deal with, of course, it wouldn't apply in this case where we decide who the external auditors are going to be. That decision lies with the audit review committee. In this case, policy requires it to be GCAS, so that's something that we don't do. In terms of they oversee internal control, that you have some knowledge of internal control and those kinds of things. And we've not yet exposed our audit review committees to those kinds of things. And we need to be intentional. I guess I am thinking in my mind that we'll be dependent on the North American division to get that ball rolling. But we may not need to wait too long, and as a union, we may need to start being more proactive in making sure that some of those things are working for us. Because division is so wide, and I don't know.
I guess my perspective is I don't want to do something that just a rubber stamp to satisfy GCAS when they come in and say, yeah, you did it. I mean, I'm not approaching it that way, but there is no direction.
Right.
Each conference probably does their own thing. So, I think.
You're right.
All right. Just think further.
Alrighty. Let's also discuss the audit timeline. Now, this timeline we've reviewed with you before, and so it's probably not something new to most of you. But this timeline does assume that all our deadlines are met. Any significant issues or unusual items, maybe new branches of business, etc., have been communicated ahead of time so that we can adequately incorporate them into our audit plan. Also, this is assuming that there haven't been unexpected things coming up on the audit that we weren't aware of ahead of time, and then that there are very few pending items. Preferably, there are no pending items, but if there are, they're being resolved early the following week, the wrap-up week, in the office in our local GCAS office. Now, you will note, and again, this isn't something new, but I just want to highlight it in case you may have forgotten, that this timeline is noting that audit preparation materials are due to GCAS 1 month prior to what we're referring to as your client week, which is the on-site week when we're at your local office working on the audit. Obviously, there will be exceptions for that if your audit is scheduled to take place very near to your year end. We realize if you're a December 31 client and you've scheduled your audit in February, you can't have things a month in advance. So we're reasonable and we work with you on those expectations. If it's something other than a month, when we're working on the scheduling, we will clearly identify to you when the audit preparation materials would be expected to be uploaded to the portal. And of course, that's clearly defined in your engagement letter as well that you sign. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the General Conference has approved some new financial policies related to transparency and accountability. And part of this policy change deals with the release of audit reports and the timeliness of that. And what this is requiring is that within 60 days of the close of the audit, when all outstanding issues have been resolved, that GCAS will provide to you the audit report, which would include, of course, the financial opinion statements, as well as the audit communication letter and policy compliance report. So that has to be within 60 days of what's referred to as the close of the engagement, and that's the resolution of pending items. If there are pending items at the end of the client week, we will be issuing an engagement extension letter that would clearly define any outstanding matters to be resolved and a deadline for those. And your auditors then will share a copy of that, of the signed version, with your officers and anyone who received a copy of the engagement letter, which would be like Seth and the audit committee, or audit committee chair. Now, this policy on transparency and accountability has been approved by the General Conference, and since we are a GC department, we are required to comply with it. North American Division is still working on reconciling their financial policies with the GC, and so they're anticipated to approve this most likely next year. So how do we prepare for an audit? I'm sure there's all kinds of different ways that you found that work for you in preparing for your audit, but I'll just give you a couple tips that I think will be helpful to you. just remember that the preparation does take place all year. It's not just 2 months leading up to the audit. Of course, you're doing your accounting work, you're doing your reconciliations regularly, and reviewing your trial balance all year long. We realize you have special year-end closing procedures that you would be doing, such as medical accruals, vacation accruals, and things like that, and maybe some other annual reconciliations. And part of your preparation also includes scheduling the audit, and we're working on that process right now for December 31 and January 31 clients. So we are in contact with you, and we'll be in further contact in the coming weeks as well. Now, another part of the preparation is the audit preparation list and getting those materials together. And as I just mentioned, those items should be uploaded to your portal 1 month prior to your client week. Now, for those of you that have year-ends coming in December and January, we are expecting to have your list available to you by the end of December. So there will be, when I say available to you, I'm referring to uploaded to your portal. Also, if you have questions, please, when you're going through the audit prep list, don't hesitate to contact us and let us know, or if you need samples, and we'll be happy to provide those. And of course, you want to review your financial statements. Remember, it's your responsibility to prepare the financial statements, and so you want to proof those, make sure everything balances out. And a good resource can be your prior year audited financial statement or the SDA accounting manual. Also, as you're scanning your trial balance each month, it's a good idea to look and see if you've noticed any accruals that need to be reversing. Some entries you do annually, sometimes you do an estimated accrual monthly, depending on your operating practices. You also want to see if the accounts seem to be in line with what you're expecting. Maybe something seems way out of line, and that might be just an error in posting or something else that you may have missed. Also, you want to consider, do your transfers net to zero, do your receivables balance with your related parties, do your interfund receivables, your due tos, due froms, do those balance out, and have you recorded your releases from restriction? And of course, does your information reconcile to that information from third parties, such as your bank statement? Does your checking account reconcile with your bank statement? If not, you probably should do some investigating. Also, you want to be sure that your trial balance agrees with any tax information that you may have prepared. Now, this is a list of some reconciliations that you should be doing, and just want to remind you, I'm sure you're all very well, but reconciliations are extremely important, and they're such a key internal control. So you want to be sure that you are doing them timely, and then when you're doing them, they should be reviewed and then visibly approved by someone other than the preparer as a good internal control as well. Another part of preparation is communication, and there's all kinds of communication that's taking place. Within your organization, you want to be sure, for instance, that you're communicating with Presidential to be aware of any plans that might affect your financial reports for the future. Also, with Secretariat, you want to let them know ahead of time that a full copy of the minutes, and that would include attachments, is going to be needed by the auditors. And you might want to get a copy for your plan asset accountant, and they may want to review that to see if there's information about church and school property changes. That can be helpful to be sure that they contact that congregation and get the information and get it recorded ahead of time. Also, for your conferences, you'll want to work with your trust services department. There could be changes, maybe a revocable trust has become irrevocable, it's matured for some reason, and then you need to record that in your general ledger, in your financial audit general ledger. So I realize you do have a trust ledger, a revocable ledger, that is separate from your financial audit, so you want to be sure when things become irrevocable that you've included them appropriately in the trial balance that then goes into your audit. Now, for you academies, it's a little bit different who you would be coordinating with, and you would want to be coordinating with your registrar. Let them know ahead of time that you need to have student enrollment information. You need to know who has entered the school late, who's withdrawn early, so that we can do a tuition predictive test, okay? You'll also want to let them know that we need to be aware of your financial information, such as the tuition fees and all of those rates. Also, it's important that you coordinate with your cafeteria or your bookstore and schedule inventory observations. and work with various departments in case there's been equipment additions or disposals that maybe you hadn't yet been informed of in the business office. Now with your audit committee, we've already talked about developing some expectations, and as I mentioned, it's also a good idea for them to be aware of when your audit dates are going to be taking place, and especially if you have a new audit committee chair, you may want to let them know that the auditors will be contacting them, not necessarily because there's a problem with standard operating procedure. Just give them the heads up. And of course with your auditor, please feel free to contact us anytime throughout the year. We're happy to help. It's easier for us to help you when something is taking place. This is billable time, and we encourage you to utilize other resources as well, but please don't be afraid to contact us. We are here to help you, and it's best for us to advise you ahead of time or help you to do something correctly than to try and figure out how to fix it later on.
You say don't be afraid?
Don't be afraid. All right, so it's important to remember that you're really not ready if you have an incomplete audit preparation list. If you haven't pulled together that information and uploaded it to your portal, really you're not fully ready. Also, if you're saying to yourself, I'll leave that till the auditors come and they always post that entry for me, or they can do that. Work with us ahead of time. Let's see how we can help you to understand what needs to be done or how to record an entry so that you can do it and it doesn't become something that's mentioned in your reports. Also, yes?
I want to just re-emphasize the billable time. You don't have, I mean, the treasurer got educated this morning. What does that mean? Explain that and who pays for that?
Sure. We track our time by audit engagement, and so if you're contacting us, we are allocating our time towards your engagement, the time that we're spent assisting you. And please understand that assisting you does not necessarily just mean the time that we're on the phone with you. There may be some time that we have to research a topic for you to be sure that we give you the appropriate answer, and so that time is charged to your engagement. There could be an instance where your audit has gone over budget, and that could be part of what could push your audit over budget. So we do encourage you to utilize other resources available to you, but please don't hesitate to contact GCAS as well. Also, another sign that you may not be ready is if there's accounts when you're reviewing the trial balance that you realize something just isn't right about that account. Maybe you remembered that you received an invoice and haven't yet passed it on to your operating accountant, for instance, that needs to be accrued. Or maybe you're aware of some sort of a legal obligation that has come up, a contingent liability that now has turned into a true liability because of a lawsuit or something. So be sure that you're communicating with your team and then posting those entries and gathering that information. Also, part of the consideration of whether you're ready or not then leads us to what do we do as far as the audit. Do we need to consider possibly rescheduling the engagement? Is there a potential impact on your opinion, or would you like to engage GCAS for some accounting services, which is something that's available to you? I would just remind you that if we do need to consider rescheduling, and this does happen from time to time, it's very important that you contact us sooner rather than later. That gives us more opportunity to find alternative audits or assignments for our staff, because if we do have to reschedule and we're not able to reassign our staff, and it's no fault of GCAS, then you will be billed for that downtime. So I just want to be sure that we understand the significance of the agreed upon audit date and that we're making every effort to meet that. And if we can't for some reason, let us know in advance and we'll brainstorm some options with you. Another option, as I mentioned, is to consider possibly just taking some impact on your opinion. Maybe there's something related to inventory that you weren't able to handle for some reason, and that's small enough that it could still be a qualification, or in some situations it may be large enough that it's a disclaimer, and we have to consider that as a possibility. You may choose that you're not able to resolve that issue for some reason, or you won't be able to in a timely manner, and so you may prefer, along with your committee and your higher organization, to go ahead and take an alternative opinion, and we could work through that with you. As I mentioned, another option is accounting services, where you would hire GCAS to come and assist you. This would be someone that would not be directly involved with that item on the audit, or preferably would not be on the audit at all, and we can arrange for that. But that service is not subsidized by the union, so that would be paid for directly by your entity. Now, with the audit budget, just to let you know, some of these things, if there are delays and they result in additional audit costs, that could translate to additional costs to you. The union does subsidize the engagement up to, there's a range that they subsidize, but if you go too far over budget, then those costs will likely be shared with you, and you'll want to be aware of that. Okay, so in summary, we know that the preparation is an ongoing process. We want to work together to make sure that's a successful process, and we encourage you to go through your audit prep list as quickly as possible. Again, those of you that are having year-ends coming up here in December, your list will be coming out soon. It may be helpful for you to review those throughout the year so that you know some of the things that will be asked for and can make your copies ahead of time and set them aside rather than having to go back and do that all in January or February as you're preparing for your audit. Also, please remember that we do have audit seasons, so if you do need to reschedule, we will have times where we're extremely busy, and so it may be hard to fit an organization in. For instance, let's say we had an academy that needed to reschedule, and they couldn't reschedule until March. Unfortunately, we're then into our December 31 season, and so that audit would probably end up getting delayed and possibly combined with the audit of the following fiscal year. So you need to keep that in mind for any deadlines that you may have for your reports. Also, we've mentioned this a couple different times, but I just want to highlight it. Please remember that we want to communicate with you before, during, and after your audit. And when we leave your client site, that's not the end of the audit for us, and we will be following up with you with the questions as well as sending you the draft, and we encourage you to review that as quickly as possible and send us any questions, and then, of course, the release. All right, well, thank you for your time.